What if the person you thought cared about you was only ever interested in your money? Imagine a lonely widow in her 70s sitting at the kitchen table one quiet morning. A simple message lights up her phone. And by the end of the year, nearly $1 million of her life savings are gone. This isn't fiction. This is what really happened. But there's something even more shocking. The moment she realized it wasn't love at all, it was a scam. Stay with me because the truth is stranger than anything you could imagine. Welcome to Unfiltered Seraphine, the place where we peel back the layers of real-life crime, deception, and the human stories behind them. I'm your host, Seraphine, and today we're going to deep dive into a case that combines romance, loneliness, and one of the most sophisticated online scams you will ever hear. Before we continue, I want to be clear. This episode deals with real people and real loss. I'm going to share events as they were reported, and I'll use terms like allegedly where appropriate. We'll focus on the experience and the facts, not sensationalize details out of respect for everyone involved. What you're about to hear didn't start with money. It started with loneliness, a screen, and a simple greeting that changed everything. In the quiet morning light, Margaret Loke moved slowly through her small San Jose condo. In her tiny kitchen, the countertop was bare except for a few faded photographs, the only food she would see that day. She hardly cooked anymore. I hardly cook because I'm alone, she often told herself, a faint smile on her face as if saying a secret. The kettle hissed on the stove and a distant hum of traffic drifted through the open window, but otherwise the house was still. Old dishes were stacked neatly in the sink, untouched. Only the ticking clock and the flip of a newspaper kept her company as she went about her simple routine. Later, Margaret might step out onto the balcony of her 2-bedroom retirement condo and look over the quiet street below. Maple leaves rustled in the warm breeze, and far off she could see shoppers bustling under the bright San Jose sun. Inside, the rooms smelled faintly of rice tea, a reminder of breakfasts she once shared with her late husband. She kept a few photographs on a mantelpiece, her and her husband smiling at a temple in Taiwan, and every so often she would smooth her hands over one and smile. At 68, now widowed for several years, Margaret had settled into a life of gentle routines, tending a pot of orchids on the balcony, polishing the wooden floors each Saturday, and reading old Chinese poems before bed. Each day seemed as predictable as the last and exactly how she liked it. But even this steady quiet carried its own weight of loneliness. Often Margaret felt invisible to the world. Friends' birthdays passed with nothing but a card from the past, and casual encounters at the grocery store always left her wondering, did he speak to me because he had to? Experts note that older widows often live with deep isolation and a sense of being overlooked, and Margaret knew that feeling well. She would brew a pot of jasmine tea and sit by the window, watching children walk to school and couples stroll past in the park, softly humming a love song her husband used to sing. Sometimes, in that quiet afternoon light, she would laugh at the memory of something silly he once said, and it felt like he was right there, sitting beside her again. For long stretches, her days passed on gentle autopilot. One soft movement leading to the next, nothing too loud, nothing unexpected. Then, one ordinary spring morning, a message popped up on her phone. A friend had sent a casual note. There was, A nice guy. She should say hi to on Facebook. Oh, this is a nice guy. You just say hi to him, the friend had written. Margaret paused, surprised at the suggestion, but she typed a quick hello and hit send. It was such a small thing, just a brief hello to someone new. Yet as she did it, the gentle certainty of her routine quietly shifted. Her quiet life, it seemed, was about to take an unexpected turn. Margaret awoke the day after her first hi, feeling a flutter of hope. A friend had introduced her to a man named Ed on Facebook, and now the phone buzzed with his reply. She learned right away that he, a businessman of Chinese descent, lived far away. He said, "I like to meet people from San Jose. I am from Texas." But distance didn't keep him from reaching out. Every morning, her screen lit up with his greeting. In her sleepy kitchen, Margaret poured coffee and read Ed's cheerful text, "Good morning." She soon found this daily message comforting. "He sent me every day the message, 'Good morning,'" she recalled. Soon, Ed was woven into the fabric of her days. On WhatsApp, they traded stories over lunch and dinner. What they ate, where they walked, childhood memories, and familiar hometown landmarks. Each detail made their long-distance chat feel delightfully ordinary. True to his word, Ed kept in touch relentlessly. In fact, a crypto news report notes that he said he was a successful businessman and stayed in touch every day. Mid-afternoon pings and evening check-ins became part of Margaret's routine. When she mentioned cooking soup, he wrote back about his own dinner. When she sent a photo of her cat napping on the sofa, he answered with a joke about his dog. These small, attentive exchanges, the gift of attention, began to warm the quiet hours of her life. As the weeks passed, flirtation crept in. Ed started calling her honey, and she began calling him love. One night, Margaret found herself surprising even herself by confessing on screen, "When I think of someone special, it's you that comes to my mind. It touches my heart so deep." His reply was equally tender. "The feelings between us are real, and I miss you every day. I hope our love can last forever." Reading those words felt like a warm embrace through the phone. Each compliment and promise made her lonely living room feel just a little less empty. In those late-night chats, Margaret's heartbeat would slow, soothed by Ed's steady attention. She felt seen and valued in a way that had faded since her husband died. Each affectionate text wrapped her in a gentle illusion of being loved. Margaret's daily routine now revolved around their conversation. She woke up looking forward to his "Good morning" text and went to bed after sharing photos and whispers of everyday life. Ed even insisted their newfound bond be kept private. She remembered him saying he could never meet in person and that their chats should stay between them. In that moment it felt thrilling, as if they shared a secret, and it never occurred to her as a warning. In fact, she felt oddly safe. Even the rule felt intimate, making her believe their bond was special. Only later would regulators note that a new online friend who refuses to meet in person and takes conversations off the record is exhibiting a textbook red flag. At the time, though, Margaret only felt chosen. The consistency of Ed's messages built a comforting rhythm. If her apartment grew too quiet, she knew he would be there by dawn with a sweet greeting, and at night with a heartfelt good night. Each ping of her phone was like a sunrise or a warm blanket, erasing loneliness bit by bit. Then, one summer afternoon, the tone shifted. Ed casually asked about money, something they had never discussed. And then he started asking me, "What investments do you have?" Margaret later said. The question caught her off guard. Up to that point, their talks had been about family, meals, and mutual understandings. Never about finances. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, wondering why he cared. But mostly, she didn't question it. By then, she trusted him almost instinctively. So she simply answered honestly that she had no investments. A flicker of doubt passed through her mind, but it was small and quickly drowned out by the comfort of their routine. Unaware, Margaret remained glued to the daily warmth of Ed's messages, still not realizing that this gentle shift would later lead her into the next chapter of the scam. Margaret sat at her small kitchen table, morning light spilling across unopened bills and the laptop screen. Ed's text had come at dawn. "Open the trading app now." Her fingers trembled as she logged in. Heart pounding, Margaret nervously keyed in $15,000, the first investment he had coaxed from her, and hit trade. Seconds later, the number on the screen leaped skyward. It looked like her money had almost doubled. "I put in $15,000 and it became $39,000, she would later say, trying to grasp what had happened. In reality, the ad simply flashed a $24,000 gain, a profit that felt miraculous. Tears of relief sprang to her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered to herself. "I really made money." Margaret could hardly believe it. The stranger she'd met on chat had set this up, walking her through a process that felt almost magical. He called her honey in messages, reassuring her each step of the way, and now she had extra cash she hadn't had before. Her chest fluttered with hope and a surprising sense of pride. Maybe this was real. Yet a small voice in her mind nagged. Was it really? She remembered that even hearing it might be too good to be true. Indeed, authorities warn that scammers often deliberately falsify trading data to fool people. In this moment, though, Margaret didn't see it. All she felt was excitement mixed with a flicker of unease in the pit of her stomach. As the days wore on, Margaret became more relaxed. The app's cherry notification dinged again, reporting her first withdrawal, a modest amount just to test the waters. It arrived in her bank account almost overnight. They really sent it, she thought, a little wonder widening her eyes. According to financial experts, letting someone withdraw a small chunk is exactly what fraudsters do to build trust. But Margaret, dazzled by the tiny victory, took it as proof of legitimacy. She even jokingly texted a friend, "Looks like my money's making me a rich widow after all." The friend sighed in jealousy, thinking Margaret had finally found a lucky break in her lonely retirement. Behind the scenes, of course, none of it was a miracle. It was an illusion. The platform she traded on was nothing more than an empty shell controlled by con artists. In truth, Ed and his team were puppeteers. With every trade she thought she made, they clicked buttons on a secret account to make her balance dance. Regulators describe this exact trick. Scammers provide what they claim is real-time trading information that is in fact fake, letting victims watch phantom gains. It's like playing a rigged video game where the points suddenly jump. The player thinks they have won, not knowing the house computer controls the scoreboard. Even government alerts warn investors not to trust quick wins like hers. These are made-up profits on a screen. One news report summed it up bluntly. The profit only looked real on screen. The platforms showing those gains were controlled by scammers, and the money was never invested. In other words, Margaret's growing balance was a cartoon ghost of money, entirely under someone else's command. Margaret tried to reconcile what she felt with what she'd later learned. Right now, she only knew the rush. She checked her phone repeatedly, smiling at Ed's praise. "You did great, honey," he texted. "See, I told you it works." He painted grand futures, vacations she could take, bills she could finally pay. Every word tightened her trust. It was exactly the long con experts describe in romance investment scams. Months of affection culminating in promise of wealth. In scam lore, they even have a name for this: pig butchering. Fattening a victim with flattery and fake profits before the slaughter. Regulators say these scammers first gain the trust of victims over time and then deceive them into investing in fake crypto assets. Margaret didn't know that buzzword, of course. She just knew she trusted Ed, but she knew she trusted Ed more than anyone she had spoken to in years. The very next night, the phone buzzed again. Ed's photo popped up in her inbox. He was smiling, giving a thumbs up. His message was simple: time to go bigger. He wanted her to invest $120K now, the next step in their $5 million goal. Margaret froze. $120K was nearly all the savings she had. Money earmarked for her home. Panic fluttered in her chest. But Ed's words soothed her. "Just trust me," he wrote earnestly. "I will make you $1 million." She remembered the thrill of that first profit, how her doubts had been silenced in the joy of winning. Deep down, a tiny alarm bell rang. But it was drowned out by hope. And so, Margaret sat there as evening fell, her bank's web page open and a sum waiting to be transferred. If she hit send, those funds would never see the light of day again. Something investigators warn is virtually guaranteed when scammers control the site. Yet in that moment, all she felt was determination. The screen glowed, and with a trembling breath, she typed in the bigger number. Ed's scammer script had done its work. She was now ready to invest even more. Margaret stared at the screen. Her eyes widened as the numbers jumped again, way beyond anything she'd ever seen before. The app she was using showed her balance climbing past hundreds of thousands of dollars as though she had stumbled into a financial miracle. She clicked around, baffled and exhilarated. How could this be real? She wondered aloud. Ed's texts came through right then, comforting, encouraging, just like always. "You saw it work once. Now imagine what we can build together." His tone was calm, enthusiastic, so reassuring that it was easy to forget how much money she was moving. Behind the scenes, though, none of this was genuine profit. The platform was a fake interface, set up by the scammer. The numbers she saw weren't real market movements. They were visuals programmed to show growth to keep her trusting the system. That's how romance plus crypto scams operate. They manufacture profits on a screen to emotionally hook a victim into thinking they are winning, so they'll invest more. These types of frauds are widely known as pig butchering scams, a disturbing term referring to the process of fattening up a victim with supposed gains before the final financial slaughter. Scammers cultivate emotional connection and then push investment through phony platforms that display convincing gains by operators, not markets. For the first time since meeting Ed, Margaret felt confident, not just hopeful, empowered. It was like watching an unexpected turn in a long story. What started as lonely evenings chatting on WhatsApp had become a shared mission to build something lasting, something secure. And now, here was proof, on the screen, that they could succeed. So when Ed suggested she invest even more, it didn't feel reckless. He wrote, "We are so close to our goal. I believe in you. You just need to take the next step." The next step was putting in $120K, money Margaret had tucked away in her retirement accounts. That summer afternoon, Margaret found herself signing the form at the bank. The pen weighed heavy in her hand, heavier than she expected. But she kept thinking of the numbers on the screen and the possibility of a future that didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. Once that money was sent and processed, the platform once again showed big gains. The visual climb on the fake trading app was dramatic, near miraculous, and kept her heart soaring. But still, something in the back of her mind flickered with unease. Why hadn't she heard from friends? Why didn't she feel comfortable asking them to look at the numbers with her? The scammers had asked her to keep things private, just between us. And that secrecy wrapped around her like a soft blanket, convincing her that this was just their special connection. In truth, that request for secrecy is one of the classic tactics used in these schemes. Scammers often try to isolate their targets emotionally by encouraging them not to tell friends or relatives, claiming no one else will understand us, which makes outside scrutiny less likely. By the time the request for the bigger investment came, she had already invested over $100,000, and her trust was rooted deeper than ever. Investigators say that this manufactured urgency is another hallmark. Once the fake profits are visible and the victim is emotionally invested, the pressure shifts from gentle suggestions to a boastful claim that even more future gains are within reach, so long as you trust me. Margaret followed his word. She wired another $490K, almost all her remaining retirement savings, into the scammer's account. The app gain displayed huge profits, a roll of numbers that would have made her breath catch with excitement if it weren't so surreal. And at that moment, when her balance supposedly reached into the millions, she believed she had secured something extraordinary. But the emotional high was fragile, and behind that screen, numbers were just illusions controlled by orchestrators far away. Just before she tried to withdraw any of her gains, that illusion began to crumble. Because with all scams like this, once you think you can cash out, that's when the pressure turns into demand. For weeks, Margaret watched that glowing app with growing disbelief and growing attachment. What started as a $15K test turned into hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least on the screen. She felt proud, hopeful, alive again. And Ed, who had been the gentle voice in her lonely mornings and quiet nights, seemed beside her through it all. But then something changed. The messages stopped being as sweet. One night, Ed didn't send his routine goodnight message. Instead, he called. His tone was sharp. "You have to borrow more money." Margaret blinked at the phone. Borrow? More? In the scam reports from her story, that moment is where the emotional manipulation and financial exploitation fully intersected. Ed didn't just want her trust anymore. He wanted her last cents. According to how these scams operate, once a victim has seen profits and emotionally invested in the relationship, the pressure shifts from cozy persuasion to urgent demand. Scam scripts often escalate. Instead of gentle encouragement, you get insistence. Instead of support, you get pressure to act now. Instead of promises of shared future, you get fear and consequences if you don't comply. Ed kept saying, "You have to borrow. It's the only way to unlock your funds." That was the line that would cost her the rest of her life savings. Margaret didn't have $1 million, but Ed insisted this was the final step, the only way to cash out her profits. She felt cornered, and the emotional script he had built over months wrapped her thoughts like a fog. She called friends and asked about loans, but no one could or would lend a figure like that. So, with trembling hands and deep worry for her future, Margaret did something she never imagined. She took out a $300,000 second mortgage on her condo, her last safety net, and wired that money too. Even then, when the app showed her balance at $2.4 million, the relief was short-lived. Something gnawed at her. The way Ed's tone changed, the insistence, the urgency, and then it happened. When Margaret tried to withdraw any of those supposed gains, the money was gone. The platform froze her account. Customer support disappeared. Ed stopped writing. The screen that once glowed with big green numbers went blank. She was left staring at nothing. This exact pattern, fake profits, then freezing, then disappearance, matches what investigators have documented in many romance investment scams. Once the victim is financially committed and emotionally dependent, the scammer pulls away, leaving the victim with no access and no resource. Law enforcement warns that victims wiring funds offshore, as Margaret ultimately did, face an uphill battle in recovering them, because once money reaches these controlled accounts, it's almost impossible to trace or return. For Margaret, the shock was devastating. She told a reporter, "Why am I so stupid? I let him scam me." And in that anguished moment, the illusion she had wrapped around her heart, the illusion of love, security, and future, collapsed in a single breath. Letting go of her trust wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was realizing that every sweet message, every gentle encouragement, every promise of together had just been part of the trap. She had trusted a person, and inadvertently, a fraudulent investment scheme built on a fake platform. And in one final blow, she learned that most of her money had been wired directly to accounts overseas, a detail confirmed by investigators in the case and typical of these frauds, making recovery exceedingly unlikely now that the funds had left US banking channels altogether. When Margaret's crypto account froze and Ed stopped messaging, she felt as if the ground had slipped out from under her. All of the warmth, all of the hope, gone. And with it, nearly $1 million of her retirement savings, money she had worked a lifetime to protect. She told reporters, "All my money is gone to the scam. I tried to save the house. That's the only thing I have." Her voice cracked as she said it, her eyes brimming with fear that her home, the place she had built and lived in for decades, might slip away too. Margaret didn't discover she had been scammed because someone at the bank warned her. She didn't stumble on suspicious transactions first. She asked ChatGPT, an AI assistant, what was happening, and it responded bluntly, "No, this is a scam. You better go to the police station." That moment jolted her heart like cold water. She panicked, dialed law enforcement, and said to her supposed partner, the man she called Ed, "You are scamming me." Only then did the frightening reality start to settle in. Authorities later confirmed that Margaret suspected the money she had sent was being wired to accounts in Malaysia, where the scammers collected it. When a victim reports a crypto romance scam, law enforcement agencies like local police, the FBI, and federal consumer protection bodies begin a process that includes taking a report, tracing the money, accessing whether criminal charges can be filed. Margaret's first step was reporting what happened. That's how these cases entered the official system. Victims provide details, transaction records, and timeline. Investigators check where these funds went, In crypto scams, this often involves blockchain addresses and banks overseas. In her case, some funds were traced to Malaysia, a detail investigators can sometimes confirm even if recovering it is extremely difficult. Not every scam immediately results in arrests, especially when operations are international, use fake identities, or route funds through complex channels. In Margaret's situation, no public records show a direct arrest or prosecution tied specifically to her scam as of now. Romance or crypto scams, especially pig butchering, present unique challenges for investigators. Offshore accounts make tracking and legal action harder. Fake identities hide perpetrators behind layers of deception. Money often leaves US jurisdiction quickly, diminishing prospects for recovery. Investigations can take years before any arrest, indictment, or court filings are publicized. Sometimes law enforcement is actively involved behind the scenes, but details aren't released to protect sources, methods, or ongoing inquiry. This isn't unique to Margaret, it's how these scams typically unfold and why advocacy groups urge victims to report as soon as possible. Because the longer scammers control the money, the harder it is to trace or freeze it. Experts describe the scam, as I said before, this type of long-game fraud that combines romance and fake investment. It's named after the idea of fattening up a victim with affection and fake profits before the final financial blow, the butchering. Scammers build trust, isolate victims emotionally, and then introduce phony investment platforms designed to show fake gains that entice bigger contributions. Margaret didn't just lose money, she lost peace of mind. She now faces a huge tax bill from pulling funds out of her IRA early, fear of losing her home, emotional trauma, not just financial loss, but betrayal by the illusion of connections she had built. She now warns others gravely, don't invest with someone you have never met in person. That message isn't just financial advice, it's a lesson born from heartbreak. While Margaret's specific case hasn't publicly shown arrests yet, authorities are actively cracking down on the large pig butchering network. For example, the Department of Justice in 2025 filed civil actions to seize large cryptocurrency holdings tied to pig butchering scams worldwide, showing that enforcement does happen at scale, even if individual cases are not always disclosed publicly. Law enforcement analysts and blockchain tools are being developed to detect and flag scam wallets, helping investigations and sometimes freezing funds before they disappear. But even with these efforts, industry experts and regulators warn that recovery in many individual cases remain difficult due to the cross-border, complex, and covert nature of these schemes. In the end, Margaret's story isn't just about money loss. It's about trust exploited, and the human cost when someone seeking connection is met with deception instead. Her case reminds us three things. Scammers don't just steal funds, they manipulate hearts. Loneliness can make us vulnerable in ways that feel deeply personal. Reporting early helps investigators, even if recovery isn't guaranteed. This wasn't just a bad investment. It was a painfully human experience that millions around the world are still trying to understand and still trying to prevent. Before we wrap up, let's talk about what signals often show up in scams like this. Not just cold facts, but the human patterns behind them. These aren't meant to shame anyone who's been hurt, but to arm you with knowledge so you can protect yourself and others. Scammers often try to build trust and even affection right away. They will send warm messages daily, talk about shared interests, or even profess strong feelings before you have ever met in person. That eagerness isn't romance, it's manipulation. In romance investment scams, the goal is to fast-track trust so you will listen to financial suggestions later. Experts warn that overly intense emotional connection early on is a major red flag. If someone you just met tries to move the conversation from a public app to text, WhatsApp, Telegram, or email, pause. Scammers prefer private channels where there's no oversight or easy documentation of what's being said. Once the relationship seems real, that's when the pitch often arrives, not for dinner or a trip, but for investment. Scammers will introduce cryptocurrency opportunities, fake trading apps, or suggestions to make easy profit. Real financial advice doesn't come from someone you have never met, especially over chat. Be wary if the supposed investment site isn't on official app stores, it doesn't match well-known exchanges, antivirus flags it as dangerous, it asks you to download software from a link instead of a store. These are common warning signs that the platform is fraudulent. If someone has strong feelings but always avoids video calls or reasons why they can't meet face-to-face, treat that as a warning sign. Scammers almost never prove their identity because it isn't real. Promises of huge profits in short time frames, especially with cryptocurrency, should make your ears perk up instantly. Scammers use fake platforms to show impressive gains on a screen, but those numbers aren't real. Act now! Don't tell anyone. You must invest more to unlock funds. Real investment opportunities won't guilt trip, isolate, or rush you. High pressure is a classic manipulation tactic in romance and crypto scams, and fraud experts list it among the top warning signs. If someone you have met online tries to connect emotionally and then asks you to send money, especially for investments in cryptocurrency, that's a red flag. Real connections are built, not sold. Take nothing for granted. Ask hard questions. Talk to trusted friends or family. Get third-party advice before sending a cent. Because the cost of believing in the best shouldn't be financial future or your heart. When the dust settles after a scam like this, the loss isn't just financial, it's the trust, the hope, the belief that someone was real when they weren't. That's the part that cuts deepest. Because trust isn't something you can just withdraw like money from an account. Once it's gone, it leaves a hole that isn't so easily filled. Margaret's story reminds us of something important. Criminals don't always wear masks or shout their intentions. Often they come in the form of kindness, warmth, understanding. Exactly what someone lonely might be longing for. Scams like these aren't just bad deals, they are emotional engineering. Scammers build a sense of connection and then exploit it, weaving financial lies into something that feels real. That's part of why it's so devastating when the illusion breaks. If there's one thing to take away from Margaret's experience, let it be this. Trust can be a powerful gift, but real human connection is earned in the light, not built on the promise of numbers on a screen. Thank you for listening all the way through. If this story moved you or made you think differently about how we connect online, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, no matter how trustworthy something feels, you always deserve to ask questions, seek counsel, and protect your peace before you protect your pocket. If you want more stories like this, deep dives into real-life, human-centered cases, let me know. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.